Hello, I am Anish Giri, and I'm going to record a video for the New in Chess magazine, to which I'm a contributing editor. So, for this time I decided to have a look at my recent game, the game I played in the Wijk tournament against Baadur Jobava. Well, it's always fun when you play Baadur, of course. He's a very exciting player, and I started with 4 draws against some decent players like Magnus Carlsen, and also Caruana is not so bad, and Levon Aronian, and the world champion amongst women, Ho Yifan. And when I met Baadur, I had made 4 draws. He probably hasn't made any. Well, he was mostly losing in the tournament, so I was very excited to meet him because I was eager to score a point finally. So I was white, and okay, of course, you never know what to expect when you play Baadur. But finally, it was King's Indian. Well, I played it via the strange move order. You can also play d4 at any moment you want, but I did it a move later. And I played the main line, which is just bishop e2 and short castle. Well, here Baadur plays many things. Knight c6 is the main line. Another option is to play knight a6, knight d7, or you can release the tension right away. But this is the main move. And now white closes the center, and black plays knight e7. And here the plans are very clear, due to the fixed pawn structure in the center. White is going to push on the queen side with b4, c5, and black is going to push on the king side with f5. First, of course, removing the knight from f6. Well, generally, white should be faster, but the problem is if white is going to succeed, he might win a pawn on the queen side, and if black is going to succeed, he's going to give a checkmate. So the fight is not exactly even in the King's Indian. But anyway, by now theory is quite developed, and of course nobody is going to allow an easy mate to the white king. So I played the main line, which is b4, and it's called the bayonet, and it has been developed a lot by Vladimir Kramnik, and it has been it got in fashion again, once again thanks to Vladimir Kramnik, who reintroduced it recently with some new ideas. So here black has 2 ways to play. One way is to ignore white's offense on the queen side and play knight h5 or knight e8, and another way is to play a5. Well, now the idea is that a3 is impossible because the rook is pinned, the pawn is pinned, and if you take on a5 or bishop a3, I believe bishop a3 is the main move, then the pawn structure of white is little ruined. This pawn is isolated, and this pawn looks weak, but after white's going to play a4, a5, I mean after b6, let's say a4, and then the theory goes sometimes like knight d7 and then a5. White is still the one who enjoys advantage on the queen side, so the move a5 doesn't solve all the problems right away, let's say it like that. And the other way, of course, is to play knight h5. Ignore the queen side and just push the king side forward with f5. Rook e1, I believe, okay, c5 is possible as well, but then maybe knight f4 is somewhat uncomfortable to meet. And after rook e1, knight f4, white has to move bishop f1. Actually, knight f4, which was played in the game, is not the main move. Probably not a very good move either, because after, well, it looks very active here, but after black is going to play f5, he actually lacks a follow-up, whereas if he goes f5 here, suppose white would ignore it. Well, then the knight belongs on f6, and then the pawns will going to be pushed to f4, and then g5, g4, knight g6. Generally, that's the usual King's Indian plan. Whereas with the knight on f4, the counterplay is less obvious. After f5, black actually struggles with the plan. I play bishop f1 and f5. Knight f4 is still played, but with idea a5. I believe knight on f4 now makes sense in case of bishop a3, but that's another line. He played f5, and here I decided to ignore black's expansion on the king side, because as I said, I think with the knight on f4, the attack is not very dangerous. But I could have actually taken simply on f4. And now if ef4, just e5. And well, I was a little concerned about the long diagonal. But of course, with the pawn on e5 and d5, probably followed by queen d2, covering the knight, white has nothing to worry about. He just has a clear advantage. And another move is e4. Then I have very strong bishop e5. Well, because if I just recapture this pawn, then the bishop is going to be captured by the rook. But bishop e5 is strong. And here, white is not going to take the pawn, which would lead to weak pawns after knight f5. But he's just going to play a very strong move here, which is g3. And the f3 pawn is weakness. And that this diagonal is quite weak. And white enjoys an advantage. And I sort of saw it as a possibility, but I decided to play differently, which was fine as well. So Baadur played h6, because there is no other way to progress. Not g5. I had a lot of options. I didn't know whether I should push c5 right away, because in some lines the d5 pawn might hang. Probably not, but you never know. Well, actually, here it's attacked 3 times. Well, the bishop is going to pin it, the piece. Well, anyway, it's going to be complicated, so I decided to improve my position. Rook a3 is a nice move, just in case it's going to guard all the third rank. Actually, later in the game, this rook will play an important role. Black played g4, because he has to do something. Now I decided to play very maximalistic. I played a5 first, then c5. Well, trying to win this pawn on d5 is not a good idea. Well, I mean, in the worst case, I'm just going to play bishop c4. There is this pin. Oh, that's a strange kind of pin. There is this pin. There is going to be this pin. And these pawns on g4, h5 are not attacking anything, they're just weakness. So my opponent continued with the attack. And I played the typical, well, it's actually a typical idea in the King's Indian to play c5, and then knight d2, knight c4, it's very common. And then knight b5 is going to attack this pawn. So basically I didn't do anything genius so far. And neither I will do in the later stage of the game, but it's not the point. Yeah, well, black played knight e6. He probably will want to play, well, I don't know, maybe he'll try to play g3 at some point, or maybe h3. He has to generate some counterplay, but it can be seen that actually his play is not going to lead well, anywhere, because he actually lacks a next move. For example, if well, let's make a random move. If he's going to play g3, he's just going to capture the pawn, and there is nothing to do. So, in a way, I was happy with my position, but I decided nevertheless to force the mattress. So I attacked the d6 pawn with both my knights, and once the rook defends it, it's the only way to defend the pawn. I decided to play g3, attack this knight, and with the idea that if the knight is going to leave, I'm going to play bishop g5. Pinning the rook, and then the d6 pawn is falling and position is collapsing. The problem, however, is that even though the knight is attacked, sometimes black can allow white to take. Well, let's say just let's imagine this situation, and then he sacrificed the knight, and he's got some pawns which are a little scary. The knight might later jump to e5. The bishop got open, so. Somehow my diagonals are always. The bishop got open, so there is some potential for black to have compensation. So this was not necessary. I could actually play simple ef, and then play knight e3, and I'm going to attack this bishop, this pawn, and later my knight might join the fight for the light squares. And I believe this position is simply quite bad for black, but of course he's going to hang on with maybe queen d7, and I wanted already more. I wanted just to win material. So far, we both played pretty fast, so generally I was happy with my position. Here he took. And now I had a difficult choice. Generally, if you play a normal game, positional game, there is a rule that you should take to the center. So from the file towards the center, that would be hg. Also the move I played. But in King's Indian, the rules don't really apply. Here I opened the h file, and for now you would wonder, well, why would that be important? But okay, let's just imagine that the rook, well, this one would go to h6, the queen would somehow go to h5, and then the mate is going to be inevitable. So I had some sort of an inside voice telling me that maybe it's better to take fg. But finally I thought, it's really too far-fetched to think of the mate already here. So I played hg. Instead fg would be strong, and if I was worried a little bit about fe4. Now, as I said, if I take the piece after ef, well, I don't believe black has enough compensation for the piece, but at least he's got these 2 pawns. Imagine if I take, well, he might develop one more piece with the tempo. Well, frankly, I don't think he has enough compensation, but, well, there is some. But actually, it's much simpler even to play knight c3 here. I'm just going to pick up the e4 pawn, from which I'm attacking the rook, and the pawn, and the king is extremely safe with the pawn on. I mean, there's just zero counterplay here. So that would be probably the most neat way to finish the game. As I said, the reason why it went so wrong for black is because he played this plan of knight f4 followed by f5, which is not the way to play this position. So in a way, it's justified that my position is winning here. Instead, I took hg, and my opponent played a6. Well, basically, confirming what I thought, that he doesn't have any threats. So here, my first reflex was, of course, to take the pawn on d6, exchange some material, take the knight, and here I am exchange up. I have a rook for the knight. And generally, I thought the position should be winning. But when I started thinking about it, I thought, okay, I'm going to take here. I'm going to try to change the bishops. Well, black is going to take my pawn. And now he has a pawn for an exchange. And it's clear white has absolutely zero risk. I mean, he can play queen b3, and he's fine. But there is also not so much... there's a danger of game ending in a draw. Let's say I have to take... rook d3, knight e5, the knight might create some sort of counterplay. So I was not as optimistic about this position as I used to be. And then, when there is this rule, I don't know if it's the rule or if the rule is the opposite, but the rule is that when you see a good move, you should look for a better one. Very often the situation is if you see a good move, make a good move, but anyway, I decided that maybe instead of knight b6, I might have a better move, which is just knight c3. I actually guard my pawn on e4, and as I thought there would be no threat, I might go knight b6. These pawns are going to collapse once the bishop is lost. So, well, I was very happy here. Actually, the way to play was indeed to take on d6, and here not to take on f5, but play bishop d3 first, and after knight h4, which looks a bit scary, to go bishop c2, and then the rook covers this square, and well, it looks a little bit scary, but with his pieces, one rook here and bishop here, basically only knight is in the attack, and although the position looks a little bit worrying for white, he is actually winning here objectively, because the threat is ef, and then the g4 pawn is collapsing too. But that was not obvious. So I played this nice move, knight c3. Actually, one more move was knight b6, taking the rook, but although there is no reason not to play it, generally I was a little bit hesitant to, well, to go for something dubious. But that was quite strong too. So I played knight c3, and here basically it looks like white is just winning. But my opponent found a very strong resource, and well, I'm just going to show you. Knight h4. Yeah, the thing about move like that is that it's shocking, because, well, if you saw it coming, then you would not allow it. So it's always a shock. And of course, my opponent played it quite quickly. The move is in his style, and probably all the game he was waiting for this opportunity. Okay, so now I was left there to think. First thing is, of course, you try to think, what if I capture either knight? Well, this one is clearly bad. Knight f3 check. King has to move. Rook goes here. He's giving check. The queen is coming here, and it's mate. Taking the other knight is a little bit, well, more logical, but after rook h6, there follows queen h4. And there is just absolutely no way to defend. For a while, I tried to think about it, but, well, there's just nothing to think about. So here, there's two mates I threatened, here and here. So if you protect from one, you get from the other. So that's bad news. And what's the threat? Well, the threat is knight f3 check. So the first thing that comes to mind is maybe I should defend with all my pieces. Knight d2. Well, you know, first of all, I've just played knight c4 and knight b5. Not really with the idea to go back, so that's already quite sad. And secondly, they're just going to follow rook h6. And since I don't have any counterplay, black will just play next move queen g5 and queen h5. And then the h-file, once again, will cause me some trouble. So there was not an option. It was clear that my knight has to stay on c4 to go to b6 to create any sort of counterplay. And so, to protect from knight f3, I had to, well, I had to move this knight from c3. For example, to a4, opening the rook. Knight a4 was actually a possible move, but I think I made a better one. I played knight e2 here. Well, most importantly, the rook opens. I also, well, re-attack his knight on f4. And I ask him to do something. So black just goes knight f3, rook f3. Now he has a strong intermediate move, knight e2 check. Bishop e2, gf, bishop f3, and now we can see what happened. Basically, I exchanged all his attacking pieces, and I got the bishop on f3, which will protect my king very efficiently, but I lost an exchange. On the bright side, I have a pawn for this exchange, and I'm going to have a knight on b6. Which is a very strong, well, very good asset to have. First of all, I will be always able to take the bishop on c8 and get control of light squares. But also the knight really takes care of the queen side very well on b6. Here, my opponent had a choice. He played very quickly the next few moves. He played very positional. He exchanged this bishop, dark square bishops. And after we exchanged them, he played f4. Closing the, well, attacking the g3 pawn, getting some play on the f-file, and getting a nice pawn structure. You know, your bishop is on the light square, and you have all your pawns on the dark. It's the definition of the good bishop. However, there was less positional way to play f4 right away. But the thing is that when you play f4 here, you win a tempo compared to the move bishop h6. So now the black has actually very, his initiative is a little quicker. He wants to go rook g6, followed by queen h4. Somewhere he might throw in the bishop h3 move. I guess the best way for white is to play king g2. If you go knight b6, you might even get rook g6. And if you win the rook, then after f g3, let's say f g3, I think queen h4 looks quite strong. Maybe if you go rook e2, maybe some bishop h3 is going to come. And then there is some disaster here because the king is very weak. Although I'm not sure that this was lost time, it's still to be checked. Probably just a draw, as always. Instead, better is to play king g2. Now I might go, for example, after rook g6, I might just go rook h1, keeping control of the h4 square and h3 square just in case. Instead, black might play bishop h3 check, and then have a double attack. But I have a strong bishop, it might go to e6 or f5, and well, essentially white has enough compensation for the exchange, and the position is balanced. So f4 was more worrying. He played bishop h6, knight b6, attacking the rook on a8 from where it moved, king g2. King g2 is a good move. I strengthened the f3 outpost for my bishop, and I opened the first rank for my rook to join the h file. And then, well, white might start his own initiative on the king side. Here I was concerned about the move queen f8, which is creating some sort of threats along the f file. Here, I was trying to calculate the move rook h1. I believe I was trying to make it work, and to be honest, I didn't make it work because I missed something. It was actually possible. Well, it was not needed. I mean, maybe I can just play some move like queen e2, protect the f2 pawn, because, but this is nice. Take, rook takes f2, king g1. Now white has a nice rook, nice bishop, and his queen is going to join. The problem was rook a2. Mate is threatened. And I think this was the reason why I thought that this doesn't work, but there is a very nice drawing variation, bishop h7 check. This seems ridiculous at first. You might think, well, it's actually funny. I mean, when I play some simuls and I sacrifice pieces to many amateurs, the amateurs, their first instinct is not to take it. While sometimes even I see I sacrifice incorrectly, they still don't take it. So, well, from that point of view, you would think, why not king h8? But here, I go bishop c2, closing the rook from protecting the queen on f2. And now, incidentally, the king stands on h8, and that's quite painful because it's now under the x-ray. So king h8 is impossible, king g7 is impossible because of bishop h6, which is a nasty check. The only move is king h7. Now I'm taking on h6 with a check. Well, you think, fine, king g7. There seems to be no check from g4 because the bishop is guarding the square. There is no check here because the king is protecting it. But there is a nice variation, rook h7, nevertheless, king h7, queen h5 check. And, okay, king g7 is going to be bishop h6 check. And if king g8, there is a nice perpetual, which is a typical mechanism. The queen, well, the queen is not able to protect from a perpetual. It's basically a draw. So there was one possible way of playing queen f8. But my opponent closed the position. But actually, the funny thing is that now you may notice the bishop on c8. Well, at the moment, it seems like a good piece because the pawns are in dark squares, but actually 2 moves later, so I went rook h1. I'm going to double on the h file, rook h5, covering the square just in case. And now, okay, white was threatening to go queen h1. And when 2 heavy pieces are doubled on the open file, it can lead to some danger to the enemy's king. So queen f1, queen h1, queen f6, protecting the h8 square. Now we can see black managed to protect from a check. He has, well, he has complete control of everything, you might think, but if you look, the bishop on c8 actually doesn't have any squares here. Well, he might go to g4, but imagine I would go here queen h4. After the exchange of the queens, the bishop actually has no squares. This one is covered, this one is covered, this one is covered. And once the bishop cannot move, the rook cannot move too. So in a way, the knight on b6 controls 2 pieces. So here, while white has exchanged down, he actually has absolutely no risk. And what I missed in the game was that after the exchange of rooks, for example, I thought, okay, eventually black is going to bring the king to e7, protect this square, then develop the bishop, and then get his rook into the play. But white has a very strong plan to stop that. Bishop d1 and bishop a4. Now this is protected. And here the bishop really has no way of escaping, but black can hold the draw because, well, not by playing passively. Just knight c4 might pick up this pawn. And also, well, I could play for Zugzwang at some point. I mean, maybe better to show it if you go here. Well, this position is some sort of a Zugzwang in a way, although black probably would sacrifice the bishop. Anyway, here the way for black is to can basically wait until white goes too much forward, then he will sacrifice the bishop, open the rook, and get enough counterplay. For example, here. This pawn is attacked. Now the king on c7 stands very nicely. If it was standing on e7, there would be a check on c8, which would win the d6 pawn. That's why the king was brought to c7. And here the pawn is protected, but the bishop is going to be attacked. And black has enough counterplay to make a draw. So exchanging queens was a nice positional idea of trying to win the game. But first of all, I missed the idea of bishop d1 a4. But secondly, it seems that even that is not enough to win. But generally, as you can see, somehow, well, while knight h4 was a very strong blow, it seems that white was able to get the game, well, to still get some control over the game. So that was very, well, that was a thing that made me quite happy during the game because, of course, after knight h4, I was quite worried that I might just lose a brilliant game. But it seems like things are still under control. So I played queen h2. I thought that this was some sort of a Zugzwang position because the move bishop g4, which was actually played in the game, originally I thought it's impossible because of take and knight d7, which is a double attack. So I thought that this was a Zugzwang, and I was thinking of move like rook g5. And after queen h4, rook g6, I have actually the same endgame, but with an extra tempo. So that would give me quite some good winning chances. Instead, black could play very actively here. He could take, play queen g7 first, for example. Now he would want to go bishop g4. And there is no more, oops. If you go here, bishop g4 right away, I would take it and go knight d7, which would be a double attack. So queen g7 was a good move here, and now I go queen h4, bishop g4 anyway, take, rook h8 check. The queen was protecting this rook, now it gets deflected. Well, and this is some sort of a perpetual check. White is an exchange up, but the d6 pawn is quite weak, so black cannot really play for a win, even though he's an exchange up. If I'll try to take the pawn, then the open f file is going to be trouble for me. So this was a way to finish the game, which was quite logical. So you take the pawn, you play queen g7, you threaten bishop g4, well, and then basically just a forced draw. But my opponent thought he can try to be clever, because after bishop g4 immediately he might also have some ideas of f3 probably. But this is still ambitious. Here I played, actually there are two ways to play here. I played queen h3. Now I attack the rook. If I play knight d7, which I thought was winning, he'll go queen g6. And now if I go knight b8, he'll go queen e4 check. And there is actually quite a lot of counterplay against the king. For example, king h3. He might even take and move like rook g6, and the king is quite weak. The queen and rook are placed awkwardly. Knight on b8 is out of the game, so black has enough counterplay for a perpetual check here. Instead, I played the move queen h3 here. I first attack the rook. Now, if I have 3 check, I'm going to play king h2, rook e4, and then I'm going to play knight d7. The double attack is still there, but the king is now in the safety. So essentially, it was a very important move. And here my opponent played queen g6. Oh, it looks fantastic. He protects the rook on g4. He attacks the pawn on e4. After the logical move rook h8 check, king g7, rook b8. He's going to give check on e4. And once again, if well, in the other line, my queen stood on h2 and the king had to go to h3. Now it goes to h2. But nevertheless, black has enough counterplay here. He has a check. And he has one more check, and it's going to last forever. That's why we call it a perpetual check. Instead, here, so the move rook h8, I had a very nice move, which I was lucky to be able to play, because it's a really rare opportunity. You just play king f3, and suddenly the weak king turns out to be a strong piece. It not only guards the e4 pawn, but it attacks the rook. Now, if the rook moves, I mean, now I'm just going to pick up his rook. He has zero counterplay. The e4 pawn is protected now by the king, and the g3 pawn is protected. There is just nothing to do. If he is going to play fg, which seems a little tricky because after queen g4, it might look like the pawn cannot be stopped because rook h1 is not there, but there is a check. And then the king comes back, and the pawn is going to be lost. So suddenly after king f3, turns out black is completely lost. And, well, he simply resigned here. I was very happy about it, but unfortunately there seems to be another way to win here, which is knight d7, queen g6, and now not take the rook, but f3, protecting the pawn, rook g3, and then king f2. And suddenly the king is very safe here. There is no check. Well, if rook c8, this wins the rook. And if rook e8, oh, sorry, rook d8 is the same, but rook e8, then rook h6, queen has to move because it's attacked. Then knight. Oh, it's called a fork, and the rook is going to be picked up. Check. And white wins. Hang on. This is not true. White doesn't win the queen because of rook g2 check. But okay, white probably should be able to win with queen h5 check. So unfortunately, it was not the only way to win, but nevertheless, I was very happy to win, especially because of the way the game went. At some point, so I can remind you, I hope you didn't forget. At some point this game, and you don't want to lose the game because you know that next day your opponent is going to be, well, is going to become an immortal character on the chess scene, and this is going to be on all possible chess publications and magazines. So I'm happy that by winning this game, I made this move a little more forgotten. Anyway, thanks for watching the game, and I hope you learned something.